or this is a review of an EnoItalia 3M. It would probably apply to a bunch of the other models also. And as is typical for my videos, I get partway into a project and then I think, oh, maybe this is interesting. So anyway, this is the partway through it thing, and I've shot some parts, but I thought I'd start over again at the beginning and say that we've had this stemmer crusher for about 15 years. It has always worked. We've had a couple of times where it seemed to be behaving erratically, and for the last few years it's made a lot of noise when we ran it. But it never occurred to me that we needed to do maintenance or lubricate it. And so I've just suddenly got onto the idea of lubricating it and seeing if I can make it work better. But this is how we use it. We have the machine. We don't have it run into a bucket. We have it run into this tank or one of those purple flower pots. And but this bulk bin will hold about 1,000 pounds of crushed grapes. When we're running this thing, we will often do 3,000 or 4,000 pounds in one day, and takes a while. You have to stop, maybe every 500 to 700 pounds and kind of clean it out. It works much better that way. It gets, the stems get caught up in this thing down here with the holes, this guy, and you just pull that out and get all the stems out. When I put the wooden plywood on the bottom, and that's so that we can pick it up and move it easily from one of these to a flower pot, and sometimes we'll have a whole bunch of people out in the vineyard picking grapes, and there'll be a big crew and they'll get this one, and then we'll have two different flower pots for guys who are picking like 500 pounds. And we'll bring it in and we'll crush each one, and we keep moving the stemmer crusher between the receptacles. This part here, in addition to being a good place to write notes, is, at least on the purple thing, I can tilt it up on its edge and clean it. And that's all it's for. And anyway, I stuck the plywood underneath, and that lets me slide it around, and I don't have to worry about it falling into something. When I started into working on the bearings, I brought it out and plugged it in, and then I went around and listened, which is the bearing at the far end where the stems come out. That was making the most noise, or the most noise that I could identify. Of course, it's all off by itself. And it's easy to take it apart, and I put some lubricant on it. And that quieted it down. So I knew I was on the right track. Then on the other ones, they're all together, so you can't really hear much. So I got out a laser thermometer. And after running it for about 15 minutes dry, I went around and checked all the temperatures. And most things were 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, except one, the bearing, this bearing, which is it over here somewhere, it said 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and I thought, oh, that couldn't be right. So I reached out and touched it. Well, it was 135. I didn't touch it thoroughly enough to get hurt, but it was quite hot, and so I decided to start in to see if I can improve the bearings and figure out a way to lubricate them. Okay, here is this bearing, and I don't know if you can see that I've drilled a little hole in right there, and I'm figuring that when I get it reassembled, I can grease it through that hole. Now this one is at the other end, and this one was a little bit more complicated because there was a bunch of air pockets inside of it. But I've filled those up with epoxy, and got a hole in the top, and when I reassemble it, my goal is to be able to inject oil down through this hole. And I got an email this morning that said that the one that's most likely to give a person problems is the one that's back in here. And so I didn't really want to get involved in this because I've got to take off all these other things. But anyway, I'm going to try and do that now. Well, to get the top roller off, or the top chain loose, you can just take off the top bar. But for the bottom, you have to take off both pulleys and slide them out together. All right, both pulleys off. Now as you go through, you go along like this, I like to mark, doesn't show up very well here, I like to mark the outline of everything. Now sometimes that's so you can put it back that way, or sometimes so you can put it back like 1/8 of an inch up. And but at least that gives you a place to start and think about. Right, we've gotten the pulleys stripped off. This one was kind of difficult. I ended up putting this wrench in when it was in position, and then turning it with this pair of pliers. And nothing else, because of the way it's sort of tucked in under the pulley shaft, nothing else quite worked. Okay. When I took the bolts off this, I found that it was pretty well stuck. And after a little bit of messing around, I borrowed this guy from my neighbor, because you've got to reach all the way in to the back of this housing. And it came off easily then. I never put a wrench on it, but just twisting it in my fingers. But you can put a lot more pressure on it that way. All right, now when you get this off, I watched a YouTube video about how to do this. This is a little sort of a curved hook, and you can reach in like this. And get it started. And then come down a little ways and reach in again. And that'll do it. Now when I pull this off, you'll notice there's lots of grease in it, but that's because I've already done this. I pulled it off, and at first it was completely dry and there was no grease at all. And I blew it out and hit it with some WD-40 and then dried it off, and then went back and greased it. And then when you get ready to put it back together, all you have to do is push on it and it'll go back together. This seems to me to be a kind of a weak spot. And if you decide you want to replace the bearing, you probably ought to get the housing too, because you'd have to be pretty violent to get that bearing out of there at this point. And it might be a lot simpler just to get both parts. Okay, I kind of think that something that didn't rust or was easier to grease without taking it all apart would be good here. This is the kind of grease gun that I thought might be good, and I figured I ought to get a new one, get some grease that was designed for food grade synthetic grease, and it's little enough that I think I can reach in and use it while the machine's all hooked up. So I've never filled one of these, but I've filled similar machines. So let's see what we get, how long this takes to get it going. Sort of like doing an ice cream cone. Coffee ice cream. This is a slow bit, so I just wanted to say that if anyone has had experience with stainless steel or ceramic bearings as a replacement for a standard steel bearing, please leave a comment. I got the chain sprockets off and back on, but I wish I'd been able to use new set screws or socket head cap screws when I put it back together. Well, there's no point in trying to put it all in. Okay, when you get it level with the top, get the threads lined up. Now I've got that fairly tight at the moment. And then you want to push down on this. And that's to get the air out. And then you loosen it back up. Good thing I'm making this video showing people how to do this. It isn't very reassuring at the moment. Whoops. Okay, now all the air is out of it. Okay, great teacher I am. I just about lost faith. Okay, now you tighten it up all the way. Go around and kind of clean up the edges. Now the goal will be on this, it'll just fit in the tip, because that's, I don't know whether how well you can see it, but it's a very pointy tip. And the goal is that you can hold it and then squeeze it. Oh, well, I don't know whether that'll show up or not. But anyway, okay, looking good. I like that. All right. Well, okay. Here we are. This is the bearing that's at the end of the stem ejector chute. And this is a 1/16 of an inch drill, about 1.5 millimeters. I'll just try this right about there. Okay, now let's see what we get. Well, not getting anything with the bar in place. Let's move this down a bit. See if that makes any difference. Maybe I didn't get through the plastic. Well, okay, didn't work. Okay, quieter. Let's see, the last shot ended with me having trouble getting grease into this fitting down here where the stems are ejected. Anyway, I took it apart, fiddled with it. It finally started working better. After that, I didn't have much trouble at all with the 4 plastic bearings where the crusher happens. I drilled those in at a bit of an angle, and it didn't take too much effort to get the grease to start moving in. So So we have a way to grease the 7 plastic bearings. I've cleaned out and greased the steel bearing. So I think that's pretty good. The one other thing I found, when I put this top shaft back together, when I took it apart, I found that the shaft was rubbing on the steel for the sheet metal. And now I've moved it up and a little bit to the side, and I think that'll be much better. And that's one of those situations where I outlined it, and then when I put it back together, I could see where the outline was, and I could move it to get it into a better position. I don't know whether it had always been that way or it settled over the years. When you run this, it takes about half an hour to clean it out. Pressure wash it up, down, back and forth, and that's when I roll it from this position to this side down. And in the future, I'm going to try and make a real strong attempt to avoid blowing pressurized water into the steel bearing. Maybe I can wrap something around it before it's time to clean it. These are the unusual tools that were used in this project. The ones that looked new came from Amazon, except the Petrogel came from a food wholesale company. They sell it at More Wine also.